episode of Bad Takes in Football. What an awesome week of football. I mean, amazing weekend of football. I am so excited to talk about it with everyone today. What did everyone think of this week's slate of games? I'm telling you right now, that was an amazing Sunday. A lot of games that I didn't expect some performances out of, and we'll talk about those. But we'll give everyone a little bit of time to hop in. While we're giving everyone time, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I'm on my road to my first 100 subscribers. We are doing a giveaway. We're going to be giving away a Bluetooth portable speaker. It's a really cool speaker. I've put out a post about it, and I'll share more about it as well. We're at 53 subscribers, so we're more than halfway there. Again, so everyone that comes into this channel, please subscribe. It really helps me out. I also prompted the chat. Tell me what game you were most excited about watching this past weekend. What was the most exciting game for you? You know, for me, I put it in chat. That Cowboys-Giants game was an instant classic to me. You know, I was watching that game and I was taking notes, and I can't even tell you how many times I put down, that was an amazing final drive. That was an amazing winning drive. It was just Giants, Cowboys, overtime. It was unbelievable. So we'll dive into that. But like I said, we're going to talk about this week of NFL games, you know, that Sunday slate of games. We'll also dive into, obviously, what happened with Joe Burrow and his toe injury. And then on top of that, we'll talk a little bit about Monday Night Football's matchup. But based off of what happened this Sunday, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. So, like I said, we'll wait for more people to pile in, but we will be getting started shortly. Excited to hop into this week. Again, this was an awesome week. All right, so let's dive into Sunday's slate of games. Like I said, insane matchups. A lot of matchups where, first off, you wouldn't even expect to have what happened, and the first game is an example of this. We're going to be talking about the Jaguars at the Bengals. Now, the Jaguars were coming into this game 1-0. And, you know, it seemed like they had fixed some things, especially on the defensive side. But it seemed like they also got the offense moving as well in week one. And they were going up against a Bengals team who didn't really get on track from an offensive perspective. Last week, Joe Burrow threw for 113 yards. I don't know if I've ever seen that in his career. Again, if you were to tell me he threw for 113 yards and the Bengals were going to win that game, I would say you're crazy. But here we are. They were 1-0. The Bengals won this game 31-27. And what I can say first off is the fact that, you know, kudos to Jake Browning. Jake Browning, you had a really up and down game in this game first off, right? You threw 2 interceptions that really impacted the Bengals in this game, but you never quit. Jake Browning never quit in this game, right? Joe Burrow went down early in the second quarter, and going into that injury, first off, I thought that Joe Burrow was going to be down for maybe a play. He looked like he had kind of had a cramp or had tweaked his ankle a little bit, but I really, truly did not think that was going to be the type of injury that we're now experiencing for Joe Burrow. And it's kind of crazy to think about as a fan, right? When you're out there as a player, you know, there's so many different injuries that you can be experiencing, but you would never expect a toe to keep a player like Joe Burrow out for no less than 3 months, I should say. Joe Burrow's toe is going to keep him out for no less than 3 months. That's crazy to think about. Just a toe, right? How many times in the NFL, how many times in games have you been like, oh man, just a toe? If he was like, I think back to the Chiefs-Ravens game last year, where Isaiah Likely just had a toe out of bounds, right? Just a toe. That is such a crazy thing to think about, like the impact that a toe can have on a football game and in the NFL. Because I'll tell you this right now, the Bengals are definitely in some trouble here. They had two, I would say, of their easier games in the first 2 weeks, and they're about to hit a much tougher slate of games, including games against teams like the Bills, like the Lions. So Jake Browning has to really get up to speed and get up to speed fast for this offense. The good news for the Bengals, and something you continuously have to remind yourself if you are a Bengals fan, is the fact that you still have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. It doesn't matter who is throwing the ball to those two receivers. They're going to be able to go up and get the ball, and they're going to make plays. Jamar Chase, to me, he's a running back. You give him a screen pass, it doesn't even matter. You don't have to throw it down the field 70 yards to him. He'll get the 70 yards on the run. He is so good yards after the catch. I heard them talking about how he was a running back going up until like his 8th grade year, and he definitely kept those skills. I bet you he was an insanely good running back just watching that game, because there were so many times that Jake Browning hit him with a quick pass, and he made all of those yards with his legs there. You know, something else that I think is really important to talk about is just what is this Jaguars team, right? Trevor Lawrence, every single time he gets out there on the field, I just have like this hope that he's going to be the player that everyone was expecting him to be and hoping for him to be. But again, they're playing against a Joe Burrow-less Bengals, and he was outdueled, in my opinion, by Jake Browning. Trevor Lawrence, he had some amazing plays in that game, but he also just had such dumb plays in this game. Now, he does have some issues with receivers dropping passes, bobbling them, and they end up going into, the opponent's hands for interceptions. But you have 2 interceptions in this game, and you just can't keep throwing the ball away like that. He did have 3 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions is just, why do you continuously do this? Like, I just feel like Trevor Lawrence continuously makes mistakes, and I'm not sure when there's going to be a point in time where we'd say, okay, we've seen enough of Trevor Lawrence. I will say I'm not quite there yet. I think he needs a little bit more time with Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas as his main weapons. But I'm sitting out there, and right now I'm saying they need to run the ball with Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne is having a great comeback season after a down year last year. They traded away Tank Bigsby, which tells me they definitely have confidence in him. And then they also have a pretty solid, runner in Tootin, right? Bashal Tootin also had a great game, in this past game. He ran the ball 8 times for 42 yards. He also added 2 receptions for 32 yards and a touchdown. So, again, the Jaguars have these weapons, but they're not breaking through. Brian Thomas definitely had a down game. He had 4 catches for 49 yards. Their main receiver was actually Parker Washington. Parker Washington had 76 yards in this game. And so you have to wonder, what is sort of the game plan from this perspective, and how much of what Trevor Lawrence is doing out there is impacting this game plan? Because, again, if I'm the Jaguars, if I'm a Jaguars fan, and I'm watching you play Jake Browning as the starting quarterback for the Bengals, you have to think this is an easy win. When that happened in the second quarter and he didn't come back, when Joe Burrow didn't come back, I thought that this was going to be a Jaguars blow-away game in the end. I thought the Jaguars were going to just take the Bengals by storm in the second half, and they were going to go up by multiple touchdowns. But the Bengals didn't fold. Their defense isn't good, I'll say that. It wasn't the Bengals defense doing this to the Jaguars. This was self-inflicted, injuries and self-inflicted, problems that the Jaguars were putting on themselves. Again, Shamar Stewart went down as well. He has an ankle injury. I've heard that he's avoided a major issue, which is definitely huge for the Bengals, because, again, they cannot lose any of the talent that they have on the defensive side. But, again, if you're a Jaguars fan and you're watching this game, you're just wondering, like, okay, when do we break away from this team? And it just didn't happen. Again, I'll give a lot of that credit to Jake Browning. Jake Browning threw for 241 yards in this game. He had 2 touchdowns. He did have 3 interceptions. And, again, every single time an interception was thrown, I was like, oh, the Jaguars are going to take advantage of this. Oh, the Jaguars are going to take advantage of this. And they just never did. They were turning the ball over themselves. They had a turnover on downs in a crucial situation. You could definitely put on the coach. But also, if you're that offense, you're saying to yourself, hey, we need to make this happen. This is the Bengals defense we're going up against. How do you continuously struggle against a defense that's probably ranked one of the worst in the league? So I don't know where I'm going to put this Jaguars team right now, honestly. The AFC South is not strong whatsoever, but neither are the Jags. Like, the Jaguars, they have these talented players, but they're just not doing anything with it. I don't know how long you can hold on to hope for Trevor Lawrence when it seems like, to me, he's getting much better coaching, but he just makes too many mistakes. Every single game, I feel like this is happening. I'll pull up his stats real fast just to see. Yeah, he has 3 interceptions. He has 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in 2 games. That's not terrible numbers, but at the same time, for what you're getting paid and the competition you've gone up against, you played against the Panthers and then the Bengals defense. And you have 3 interceptions. No one should be throwing 3 interceptions against those defenses. And so that's a huge concern for me that I have for the Jaguars. Now, going back to the Bengals, obviously we need to talk about Joe Burrow more. Joe Burrow having a toe injury, first off, again, I said this before, you never realize how much a toe is going to impact a team or a game. And the fact that a toe injury is causing this is just crazy to me. As a Ravens fan, I remember also in another situation with a toe, Jonathan Ogden. Jonathan Ogden is a Hall of Fame left tackle. What ended up ending his career, the injury he went down with that ended his career, was a toe injury. I'm not saying that Joe Burrow is going to retire here, but I am saying you just don't realize how much of a toe can impact a season, a team, a game. And he's going to be out for at least 3 months. I was looking at the schedule. They're going into the toughest part of their schedule right now. Now, obviously, they've only played 2 games, but again, they played against the Jaguars and they played against the Browns, 2 teams that no one's really expecting a lot out of. If you look at the Bengals schedule next, let me pull this up real quick. Yeah. So the Bengals have the Vikings, the Broncos. They play the Detroit Lions, the Green Bay Packers, the Steelers, the Jets, the Bears, the Steelers again, the Patriots, and then on December 14th, they play the Baltimore Ravens. So those are the games that Joe Burrow could potentially miss. Now, again, it's September 15th right now, right? It is September 15th. So 3 months from today is December 15th. If I am a betting man, I am saying Joe Burrow will be back for that Ravens game on December 14th if all things go well, because he is a competitor, and I know if there is any fighting chance for them to make the playoffs, Joe Burrow is going to do what he has to do in order to get back there. But again, that is a huge slate of games that he's going to be missing, and that's a lot of pressure on Jake Browning. Jake Browning has done pretty well with the Bengals in the past. He's kept them in contention before, but this is a completely different year and with a very different defense. The Bengals defense this year is worse, in my opinion, than what he had in 2023 when he had to do this. And so, I'm just wondering, can Jake Browning keep them afloat for long enough, especially against this tough, like these tough games, right? The NFC North is probably the best division in football right now, and you're going up against all of those teams. Now, the Bears, I'll say is not someone that I would be concerned about. we'll talk more about them as well. But again, Jake Browning, he did win them this game. The Bengals won that game at the end with a game-winning drive and a rushing touchdown by Jake Browning to get in the end zone. That's how they won that game 31-27. So I am not counting out the Bengals, but your room for error just became this much less. Like you cannot make any mistakes if you're the Bengals moving forward because again, you don't have your MVP caliber quarterback at quarterback right now. Again, I also do think again he will fight back as much as he can to be in there and be ready for that Ravens game. Maybe even the Bills games, because they play the Bills before they play the Ravens. So those are two crucial games, especially for playoff positions, if you want to be in that if you want to be in that race. Right? Jake Browning has to be able to win a lot of these crucial games. And I'm not sure you can really count on him for that. Who you can count on, though, if you are the Bengals, is Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Right? T. Higgins had a touchdown and 56 yards in that game. It was an amazing catch. Two defenders ended up running into each other, which I think helped him out. But he made a great catch for that touchdown. And then Jamar Chase had 165 yards in a touchdown in that game. And again, a lot of that was yards after the catch. He wasn't catching deep balls from Jake Browning. He was getting screen passes or short passes, and he was making the plays with his legs. And so this does give the Bengals hope. But again, I don't know if they can hold on for 3 months. That is a long time to be without your best player. And it's going to be a true test to see how competitive Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are. Because, again, you're really going to have to depend on them to be making these plays. You're also going to need to see more out of Chase Brown. Chase Brown, to me especially, just hasn't really been putting up the rushing yards they need in order to get some of that pressure off of the passing game. Yeah, it definitely would be a stretch. Bailey, I do think, again, he's a competitor. Joe Burrow is an absolute competitor. One of the most interesting stories I ever heard about Joe Burrow was actually from his high school gym teacher. And his high school gym teacher said he has the same personality traits as a first responder and also a serial killer, which is crazy. But they said a first responder and a serial killer because he just stays so even-keeled. In pressure moments, in good times, bad times, he is just such an even-keeled player. And I put a lot of that on his competitiveness. I know that doesn't speak to his strength, but I'm still saying this because he's a competitor, and I know for a fact that guy's going to do everything he can do to get out there on the field. So yeah, we'll see. What game do you think he'll be back for? Out of curiosity, do you think he'll be back for the Ravens game, or do you think maybe even sooner the Bills game, or are we not going to see Joe Burrow until the Dolphins game? Right? They play the Dolphins December 21st. So what game do you think Joe Burrow will be back from? I myself, and I'm a Ravens fan, I'll tell you that right now, I see him being on the field December 14th against the Baltimore Ravens in Cincinnati. That is the most, I would put money on it just because that is such a AFC North situation. I really do see that. So yeah, where do you think he'll? What game do you think he'll return for? I'm curious. But while we're let's keep going while we get that response. Again, that Jaguars Bengals game though, did not expect that to be the type of game it was. But again, it was another reason why that Sunday was an exciting matchup of games. Like a real exciting matchup of game. That's storybook. I'm not really sure what you mean there. But anyway, that's storybook. Let's dive into what I think is an instant classic game. And if you didn't watch this game, I'm sorry. If you watched the highlights, you would have enjoyed it. But It wasn't the same as what happened in this game. I'm talking about the Giants. The Giants and the Cowboys, right? The Cowboys won this game 40-37 in overtime, and again, this was an instant classic game for me. And it was a classic in a lot of senses, and the first one being Russell Wilson looked like he could play football again. Russell Wilson threw for 450 yards and 3 touchdowns in yesterday's game against the Cowboys. I don't know if that is a testament to Russell Wilson's, arm strength and the fact that he still has it as a quarterback, or if this Cowboys defense and secondary is just abysmal. What I can tell you is Malik Neighbors is looking like the best receiver in the NFL right now. I know that's definitely probably a Monday morning overreaction. It's Monday afternoon, but Malik Neighbors out there looked absolutely insane. I think he already has the record. He just topped Odell Beckham for the amount of yards in the beginning of his career, especially as a Giant. So Malik Neighbors, he had 167 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. And the Giants still lost. Did you hear? Russell Wilson threw for 450 yards, and Malik Neighbors had 167 yards, and they still lost that game. That is a crazy, crazy situation. Again, I don't think anyone was going into that game thinking either as a Cowboys fan or as a Giants fan, thinking to themselves, hey, we're going to be watching an instant classic. This is going to be a game that we will remember for years. Everyone from the Giants' perspective was saying, when are we going to get Jackson Dart? And Russell Wilson said, guess what, guys? Not anytime soon. Not anytime soon. Not today. Yep, not today, right? Because, again, 450 yards. He had 3 touchdowns. He did have 1 interception. But, again, that was a classic Russell Wilson game. His long ball is absolutely insane, and it still is. He just has this perfect arc that he puts on that ball. And it was just so fun to watch. He was 30 for 41 in this game as well. He had 123 passer rating. And let's not forget about the other side of this ball, right? Dak Prescott. He also had a great game. He had 361 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a 96 quarterback rating. Thinking if Bengals are in the. Sorry, it's cutting off half of your message. Let me see if I can see this. Yeah, if they are in the hunt, I do think he will be back earlier. Yeah, no, it would have been cool if he. I do think he'll be back for that Ravens game. That's the game I'm predicting to see Joe Burrow back in a Bengals uniform. But yeah, getting back to this Cowboys-Giants game. Again, Dak Prescott also had a really good game in this game. 361 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. You're like, when you compare these quarterbacks, first off, no one expected this. I'm sitting here just trying to think about how do you even what to even say about this, because again, everyone was just waiting for Jackson Dart. Everyone was saying, hey, this is the game where we pack it in with Russell Wilson and decide hey, all in on Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart actually came in a couple times in this game. He actually had 1 carry for -3 yards. So I think after this game, everyone in New York, all Giants fans, have to be asking themselves, what quarterback do you want to see out there next week? I think it was a very obvious answer going into this Dallas game. Everyone was saying Jackson Dart. But Russell Wilson heard everyone loud and clear. And he said, guess what? I'm not done yet. 450 yards. That's insane. I don't understand why that's not being talked about more. I think the only reason why that's not being talked about more is just because of Joe Burrow's toe. Right? The Joe toe. But Russell Wilson is just, he put up insane numbers here, and I don't know what to do with it, because it's okay, he bought himself more time, right? That's all I feel about this. That's the frustrating part about this situation is all I feel like is Russell Wilson just bought himself more time and the Giants organization more time, I guess, to say, hey, we don't need to be starting Jackson Dart yet because it's obvious to me they don't want to. They did get Jackson Dart in the first round, but they're not trying to push him out there. It's extremely obvious. They even said recently as last week, like ideally we do not put him out there yet. I'm not sure if it's because of developmental reasons. They just don't think they have a good enough team where they want to put the pressure on Jackson Dart. But Russell Wilson bought himself at least another week from that performance, at least a week. 450 yards in one game, you don't see that every year, let alone every week. I'm trying to remember a time where I saw a quarterback threw for more yards in a game. I know that Josh Allen got close against the Ravens last week, but he still was below 400 yards. And so, again, I'm trying to remember, like, when has someone thrown for 450 yards? I can't tell you. The other aspect of this game, the reason why I love this game so much is when I was watching this, I do take notes during these games, right? I try to put down important plays that happened or just takes I might have. And I probably wrote down 4 times, what an awesome game-winning drive. Game-winning drive, right? I put that for the Giants, and then Dak Prescott responds and brings the team down the field and gets a touchdown. So then I was like, game-winning drive for the Cowboys, and then we're like 2 minutes left in the game, and Russell Wilson has another insane drive for a touchdown, and then guess what? Dak Prescott responds again, and I'm just watching this game, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, is this going to be like a 70-70 game at the end of this? Because they had 41 points in the fourth quarter alone. It seemed to be it went from one of those games where it's like, oh, this is the type of game everyone expected, to 41 points happening in the fourth quarter. And the funny part is, like, after that, it slowed down extremely. In overtime, it went punt, interception, field goal. That was the drives in overtime. And so you just had this huge disparity in this game where you're saying to yourself, oh, like, what am I watching here? Like, I'm watching, a typical Giants-Cowboys game where it's really close. Neither team seemed to be getting away from the other in the first 3 quarters. And then all of a sudden there was just like this huge explosion of offense, and then followed by just like both teams were tired and just were done scoring. And it just came down to who had the ball at the end and got into field goal range. And again, the Giants, that's when Russell Wilson threw his interception, was in overtime. And that's what really culminated the game, was a field goal to win it at the end in overtime. And so if you're the Cowboys, you're excited because you won this game. You're also really scared because your secondary looks terrible. I know Malik Neighbors is probably one of the top receivers in the league. I already said that. But again, you can't be too excited about this win just purely because you got diced up by Russell Wilson for 450 yards. I know that they're also talking about their rushing defense, right? That's a huge part of, letting go of Micah Parsons. They did decently enough in the rushing game, I would say. I think Cam Scatterbo was the leading rusher for the Giants with 45 yards. So kudos to the Cowboys defense from the rushing game perspective. That also wasn't a key focal point in the fourth quarter either. It was just like a passing clinic. But again, big win for the Cowboys. Going into next week, they are 1-1, and they won their first divisional game, which was important after losing to the Eagles in Week 1. So kudos to them. Next game we're going to get into, Bears at the Lions, and I think obvious answer to this, or obvious first synopsis is, first off, the Lions won this game 52-21, and the Lions offense is still the real deal. I think that's the first thing I'll say. Let me get some more coffee, sorry. But yeah, the Lions defense is the real deal. That's the first thing I'll say about this game. The other thing I'll say about this game is Caleb Williams a guy? Right? I think that's an important topic is Caleb Williams a guy? Because what I will say is, they started out and it seemed like Caleb Williams was responding. He was connecting really well with Rome Odunze. But really, that was the only thing that worked for the Bears and their offense, especially in the beginning of this game. I'd say DeAndre Swift had a decent enough game. He had 53, rushing yards and a touchdown on 12 carries. But again, you're going up against the Detroit Lions, who lost in Week 1 to the Packers. They were pissed, and you went up against Jared Goff, who had an amazing game, a nearly perfect game. He had 334 yards passing and 5 touchdowns in this game. This was a reunion for Ben Johnson in Detroit, and Detroit wanted to let him know that they changed the locks to the doors. They said, hey, guess what? Welcome to this game, but you're no longer welcome afterwards. We've turned a leaf, and we're a different team now, whether good or bad without you. But guess what? You're a Bear now. They booed him. They cheered when he was leaving the field at the end of the game. And again, if you're a Bears fan, you just have to be wondering, what is this Caleb Williams situation? Because he has the talent. That's the thing about Caleb Williams is he has the talent. He has the arm. He has the playmaking ability. What he doesn't have is just the mental right here. And it's one of those things where you're just like, can this be changed? Can this be adjusted? Because when they have a script, the first 10 plays of a game for the Bears, they look like one of the best offenses in the league every single time. They look clean. They operate cleanly. Caleb Williams looks confident. But once they go off script, once there is a change in the game plan, you are looking at a completely different quarterback. He looks like 2 seconds slower than he does when it's in the beginning of the game, when it's off script plays. You could just tell he is focusing on one particular receiver, and he's not keeping his eyes he's not keeping his eyes downfield. He's tracking one receiver, and he just holds on to the ball way too long every single time. And again, I don't want this to happen. I would love for Caleb Williams to be good because I love watching good competition. Again, 52-21. I didn't watch a lot of this game just purely because it was a boring game in the sense that it wasn't back and forth. It was an offensive clinic for the Lions. The Lions said, hey, Ben Johnson, this is our offense without you. Do you like it? That was basically what we were watching out there. And then again, on the Bears' defensive or offensive side, you just saw a guy that as soon as it became off script, he didn't know how to play. It's a completely different player out there. Tyson Bagent ended up getting in at the end of the game. Obviously, that's just because the game was over. But that should not happen in a divisional game. That shouldn't happen when you are Ben Johnson playing against your former team. You should know everything. You should know everything you need to about what the Lions are going to be doing against you because you were there. You have that experience, and so I'm just sitting here wondering, where are the Bears and what are the Bears right now? And I know there's a lot of people out there saying hey, he has the talent, he has this, including myself. I think he's a great talent. I don't know if he's a good quarterback. I think that's the best way to put it, right? I don't know how else to say that. He is an amazing talent, elite talent, but he's not a good quarterback. Maybe that's, I feel like I feel like Caleb Williams is who media pundits used to describe Lamar Jackson in a lot of ways from the passing perspective. No one respected Lamar Jackson in the past for 3-4 years. It was probably 4 years before people said he's stop saying he's most dangerous with his legs. Like, that's how long it took. Like, Caleb Williams doesn't have the running ability of Lamar Jackson. Let me be very clear about that. But he also just does not have elite decision-making abilities. He's just not quick on his. He's not quick in it with it. And for me, I'm just sitting here wondering, like, how long does that take to change? I haven't had to experience it that much in my experiences from a fan. So I'm just wondering, like, how long does it generally take for you to be able to make quick decisions? And that's really going to be the story for the Chicago Bears for the rest of the season and seasons moving forward is, can he figure it out how to just move 1 or 2 steps faster? Because that would make a world of difference for this Bears team. If he was like 1 or 2 steps faster with his decision making, completely different team. Because they have the talent. Again, DeAndre Swift, a good running back. Rome Odunze, proving to be a good receiver. DJ Moore, already known to be a good receiver. Cole Kmet, great tight end. So, again, a lot of this just comes down to decision making and making game-winning decisions. And he seems to just be he makes decisions way too late. Now, again, I'm happy for the Lions. I know we talked enough about Caleb Williams. I am happy for the Lions. They bounced back in the rush game, which was definitely very important to me. Jahmyr Gibbs got right back on track from a rushing game perspective. That scared me last week when both him and Montgomery struggled. I think this game shows you how good that Green Bay Packers defense is. I don't think people are going to really put that connection together. Jahmyr Gibbs had 94 yards on the run this week. David Montgomery had 57. Last week, I think they combined for like 50 yards tops. Like, that's what they combined for last week. And so, again, that just shows you how good that Packers team is. And this Lions team also, they just came out hungry. They had 2 receivers with over 100 yards in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameis Williams. That's huge. You have to also be impressed with their defense as well. They had 4 sacks in that game. They sacked Caleb Williams 4 times. Again, a lot of that to me is the fact that Caleb Williams just holds on to the ball too long. He just can't make decisions fast. But again, I don't want to go without talking about the fact that the Lions are a really good team, right? You don't just put up 52 points in a game in the NFL and be a decent team. Like, you are a good team if you do that. So again, kudos to the Lions, Bears. I hope you figure it out soon because I'm gonna get really sick of the Bears' misery. There's definitely a lot of media attention around this. I think because Caleb Williams. Sadly, I think a lot of the media kind of wants Caleb Williams to fail. I think people enjoy watching that. I don't want to see that. I hope he figures it out and turns it around. Let's go into this next game real quick. Actually, wait. Let me say one last thing about this Lions team. I love Isaac TeSlaa. If you're not an Isaac TeSlaa fan, then I don't know who you're a fan of in the NFL because that guy is just a playmaker. Every single time he gets an opportunity, Isaac TeSlaa makes an amazing catch. And I just wanted to say that real fast when it comes to the Lions is I'm going to continuously watch Isaac TeSlaa because he just seems to be a playmaker. And having a guy like that on an already potent offense is just really exciting to watch. So I did want to make sure to put that out there. Next game we're going to talk about, and we won't talk about this one too long just because, to me, not as interesting or exciting about a game. That's, again, my take. Rams at the Titans. What we learned about this game, honestly, first off, Rams won 33-19. What we learned about this, Cam Ward's a fighter. Cam Ward is just going to continuously try. He's going to continuously put up good throws, put his team in opportunities to win games and score points. But his team is just going to continuously disappoint him. Whether it's drop passes, penalties, missing concepts, bad routes, whatever it might be, poor protection. Cam Ward is just in a bad situation. Like that is just all you can say. Like, the Rams are a really good team, right? They'll have opportunities against lesser teams. You're going to play against Matt Stafford, who seemingly is healthy. Good for Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford, he probably had somewhere around, he had close to like 300 yards. I think he had like 298 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. But again, that's a game where, the Rams traveled somewhat to the East Coast, right? They're on Central Time in Nashville, but at the same time, that generally gives an advantage to the Titans, and they just couldn't take advantage of it. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they just don't have the talent, whether it's on the offensive side, the defensive side. They just don't have it there. Tony Pollard, I'll also say I don't give him enough credit. He had 92 yards rushing in this game. So, they have some players out there that are putting in pretty solid performances, but they just can't put it all together. 19 points in this game. I'll be surprised if there's any game where the Titans, there'll probably be like one game where it clicks this season. Maybe two where you'll see them with like a 30-point game, but they're just going to be a low-scoring game, a low-scoring team this whole year just because they just don't have the talent. And again, I won't put it on Cam Ward. I had my reservations. I was a little bit less bullish on Cam Ward than most. But when I watch these games, it's clear to me that he is a good quarterback, and he throws the ball to the right receiver. It's just there's just not enough talent out there for Cam Ward. So, again, kudos to the Rams. You have a great young defense. Your receivers in Nakua and Devontae Adams are going to only get better with time with Matt Stafford. So again, as long as Matt Stafford's back is healthy, the Rams are going to be a top team in the NFC. They're not the top team in the NFC, but they are one of the top teams in the NFC. Again, if you're here in chat, let me know what was the most exciting matchup you saw this past week. What game were you most excited to see, and also tell me what matchup tonight you're most excited about as well. Let's see some chats about it. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Again, I'm on my road to my first 100 subscribers. It really helps me out. Just hit that sub button right there. Really appreciate it. Next game we're going to talk about. Again, this is one of those games, I don't think, besides their own fan bases, I don't think this was a game anyone was overly excited about or was expecting a lot out of, right? And I'm going to pull this up really fast, but the Patriots and Dolphins game was a great game. It truly was a great game. First thing I'll say is hats off to Tua and Tyreek for figuring it out. Yeah, we'll go over that one soon. We'll go over the Mac Jones performance soon. Don't worry. But again, the Patriots at Dolphins. The Patriots won this game 33-27, and this was just a tight game throughout the game. It was one of those games where there was, New England went up early. You thought that you're going to be seeing the same Tua as you saw last week, but then he really just turned it around. Tua threw for 315 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, and he did have 1 interception, but he threw for 315 yards. Tyreek had 109 receiving yards in that game. That was the bounce back game they needed, because I myself and everyone else was just wondering, when were they just going to blow this up in Miami? Everyone, including myself, this isn't going to work. Mike McDaniel out the door, Tua gone, Tyreek gone. They still did lose this game. I will say that, but at the same time, they did look better. It was a huge improvement from week 1 where they got absolutely crushed by the Colts. And we'll talk about the Colts later. The Colts seemingly might actually be a real team this year. I don't think anyone expected that, but we'll talk more about that. But again, the Dolphins-Miami game, going into the fourth quarter, there was 5 incomplete passes between those 2 quarterbacks, right? Drake May and Tua were both putting on a clinic in this game. Mac Jones threw for 230 yards in this game. So, you saw over 500 yards passing in the air. Drake May had probably the best performance of any second-year quarterback this week. I'm putting up against Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix. Drake May had the best performance this week of any of those quarterbacks. And also Tua had an amazing week as well. I won't hate on him this week because I felt like he did what he had to do in order to win this game. The biggest difference to me in this game was the kickoff or the punt return for a touchdown, right? So Miami returned a punt for a touchdown for 74 yards for a touchdown, and you felt like that momentum had shifted. You're like, oh, Miami's going to win this game. They have this. But immediately after, New England returned that kickoff for a touchdown. Immediately after. And to me, that was what really killed the Dolphins. They had this momentum, and then they just lost it so fast, and they just couldn't get back into it. The Patriots put up another field goal, so they're up 6. And I was watching this game, and Miami actually had a shot to win it. Tua threw a really good pass to Achane down the sideline, and Achane, again, we're going to get into the game of inches, the game of toes situation. He puts 1/8 of his foot goes out of bounds on his touchdown run, and it gets called back, and the Dolphins just couldn't create enough offense to get into the end zone after that. Tua ended up getting sacked to end that game, right? They lost by 6. If that touchdown had counted, if Achane didn't step out of bounds, we're talking about a 1-point victory potentially for the Dolphins. But again, just that much space between him and the end line, or him and the sideline, and he steps out of bounds, and that's the game for the Patriots right there. And so you have to be happy for Mike Vrabel getting his first win as the Patriots head coach. Drake May and him seem to have a really good relationship. I had my reservations on Drake May as well. I wasn't 100% sure, if and when he was going to be a good quarterback in the NFL, just purely because I don't trust UNC's. Like UNC quarterbacks, they've never necessarily panned out in the NFL before. And so for me, I was skeptical. But he seems to be doing a good job of one, protecting the ball. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes, right? That's a huge part of being a young quarterback, is just minimizing mistakes, and he did that, right? Tua had an interception, he didn't in this game, and those are the things that can make or break a team and change, a game's trajectory. And the Patriots won that game, and again, kudos to the Patriots for that win. And Miami, I think you have to be a little happy with what happened. It was a lot better than what week 1 looked like. And so we'll have to see how Tua turns around, and if, him and Tyreek can have a repeat performance in week 3. Next game we'll be talking about the showdown, the absolute showdown between two quarterbacks that no one ever expected to probably talk about in a 2025 NFL football game. I am talking about Mac Jones and Spencer Rattler, right? The 49ers versus the Saints. The 49ers won this game 26-21, and this was probably one of the more surprising, exciting games that no one really expected solid offensive performances from. When I was talking about this game last week, I projected this was going to be a messy game. I thought this was going to be a low-scoring game. I didn't think either team would get into the 20s in the points perspective. I really didn't. I think Rattler, to me, he's a guy that can make special plays, but then he'll just turn around and throw it right to like a defensive player the next play. Like that is the type of player Spencer Rattler is to me. He has this amazing arm talent. He was the #1 recruit coming out of high school for a reason. Right? He has the talent, but similar to Caleb Williams, I just don't think he has that elite mental game. Right? I think that's where Spencer Rattler really struggles. Is he just doesn't have the mentality that some of these winning quarterbacks have. And on the other side, you have Mac Jones, who was drafted by the Patriots, first-round pick He saw his failures, under Bill Belichick, and kind of has been hanging out around the league for a couple of years without really doing much. And again, he had a great performance in this game. Mac Jones threw for 279 yards. He had 3 touchdowns and no interceptions in this game. That is unbelievable, just to say the least. Spencer Rattler had 207 yards passing. He had 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So we're talking about 6 touchdowns between these two quarterbacks. I would have said it the other way. If you were to ask me what's more likely, Mac Jones and Spencer Rattler to combine for 6 touchdowns or for 6 interceptions, bar none would have said interceptions. No thought in my mind had these quarterbacks playing at the level that they did. Spencer Rattler was 25 for 34. And that's a really good completion percentage. On the other side, Mac Jones, 26 for 39. Again, these quarterbacks played well. This was not the type of game anyone was expecting in New Orleans. San Francisco, again, they were the victors, and you have to give them props for going into New Orleans and winning this game. Christian McCaffrey, his stereotypical 50 yards and 50 yards, right? 50 yards rushing, 50 yards receiving. That's what he's known for. He did exactly what he needed to do. Juwan Jennings had the game he needed to have for the 49ers. He had 89 yards and a touchdown. Purcell, he had 56 yards. On the other side, there was a pretty balanced, passing attack as well. Olave, 54 yards. Rashid Shaheed, 52 yards. 49 yards for Juwan Johnson, sorry. Right? So it was very balanced. And all I can say is I was impressed with the fact that this was actually a watchable game. That is where I would put this. I'm amazed that this was actually a watchable and interesting game. And I'm sorry that for anyone that missed it because they counted both these teams out. But I mean the 49ers, they found a way to win without George Kittle and Brock Purdy. They just continuously do. They're 2-0 now. We'll see if they're able to repeat it. The 49ers, let me look at their schedule, who they have coming up next. But, they have the Cardinals. The Cardinals, we'll talk about them soon. The Cardinals are a little bit better of a team than I expected this year. I was definitely counting them out. I'm not a Kyler Murray believer, I'll say that. But, they have a tough sledding without Brock Purdy and George Kittle. So we'll see how they can respond. But, kudos for them for going 2-0 to start the season and winning a game against the New Orleans Saints 26-21. We'll talk a little bit about this next game, not too much, just purely because it was pretty much exactly what everyone expected. I'm talking about the Bills and the Jets. The Bills won this game 30-10, and this was the worst rebound game for Justin Fields I've seen in a while. Justin Fields, he threw the ball for 27 yards in this game. He wasn't in there for the whole game. Tyrod Taylor also entered the game, and he threw for 56 yards, but he did have a touchdown. Breece Hall was shut down. He had 29 yards. So that's all you really need to know about the Jets in this game is they just looked really bad. And then the Bills are good. Surprise. I don't know if people knew that, but the Buffalo Bills, they're a good team. They didn't have to do much in this game. Josh Allen threw for 148 yards, right? So if you're looking at that stat, you say, oh, the Jets defense did really well. James Cook had 132 yards on the ground. Josh Allen ran for 59 yards, right? This Jets team, it looked like they showed up. Justin Fields, he had momentum, he had confidence after that Steelers game, and then I don't know what happened. Maybe he just didn't care about this game because it wasn't the Steelers. The Steelers game was his revenge game. I think he wanted to prove that he's a better quarterback at this point than Aaron Rodgers. He didn't prove it. First off, second, you lost the game, and also you lost a divisional game against the Bills. Josh Allen, I think, broke his nose. That's probably the biggest story coming out of this game. But again, the Bills are good. The Jets are bad. Kudos to the Bills. That's really all you need to know about this game, if I'm being completely honest. Seahawks and the Steelers, this was a different game than I expected. The Seahawks won this game, first off, in what I would consider to be a very disappointing offensive performance for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Seahawks won 31-17, traveling to the East Coast in an early game. Again, I always look at that when I'm looking at games is, who's traveling and when is it? And if you're a West Coast team and you have to travel to the East Coast for an early game, that's a huge disadvantage. It truly is. And Sam Darnold had his ups and downs in this game, right? He had 2 touchdowns. He also had 2 interceptions. The interceptions were earlier in the game, though, and I think the Seahawks were able to bounce back from those challenges and those mistakes. But Kenneth Walker had 105 yards rushing as well. So 295 passing, 117 yards on the ground. That's a great game for the Seahawks. That is exactly what the Seahawks needed to get Sam Darnold, first off, some confidence. Because, again, I'm sure there's a lot of people after week 1 saying, 1, the Seahawks team is probably not going to be as good as we expected. 2, Sam Darnold is not the Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings, right? He had 150 yards passing last week. He was really able to turn that around this week. He went 22 completions of 33 attempts, right? That's really good numbers. And again, everyone I'm sure was concerned. Is this what Sam Darnold are we going to be getting in Seattle? And he proved that he can actually play. He proved hey, I can operate this offense. And that was a big part of it. On the other side, Rodgers. Rodgers, to me, he's had the similar hangover to Justin Fields. It wasn't to the magnitude. He had 203 yards passing. He had a touchdown. It was a really short, quick pass to DK for a touchdown. DK got his revenge, if you will, on the Seahawks, even though the Steelers lost. But Rodgers also threw 2 interceptions. And Rodgers was also getting hit pretty often. There was a couple plays, he had one miraculous scramble pass down the field. I think it was I think it might have been to Freiermuth, or I think it was to Freiermuth, where you're just wow, this guy still has it. But there's also times where you just watch and you're just man, he's so old, right? You just watch him and you're this guy is just old, and I don't know how much longer he can really do it. Let me just also say this real fast. I don't think the Steelers are a bad team. They did have also one crucial mistake on special teams. Their rookie running back, Johnson, he had the ball that essentially nicked his body, and it went into the end zone, and he just didn't even think about it. He just walked off the field, and the Seahawks ran down and collected the ball in the end zone, and they got a touchdown there. And that, to me, probably was what sealed the game for the Steelers. But at the same time, it wasn't the only reason why they lost that game. They're really struggling, especially to me. Their run game is just not completely there. I think Jaylen Warren's pretty solid. He's kind of a poor man's Christian McCaffrey in the sense that he's good in the run and in the pass, but he's just not to the same level of talent or his ability of Christian McCaffrey. And so you need to have more solidified weapons out there. And when Jaylen Warren is your leading receiver, followed by Pat Freiermuth, followed by another tight end, so their top 3 receivers were not a receiver. Let's just think about that. That is not a good recipe for success, right? You have DK Metcalf, right? If you want to be excited about Calvin Austin, sure, you have Calvin Austin. You have, Roman Wilson. I think he caught his first pass of his career in this game. It was for 7 yards, and he got absolutely crushed. He got flipped in the air. So that's going to be the story of this Pittsburgh team to me is, can this receiving core figure it out? Can this passing game figure it out? Because you have a 41-year-old quarterback who's throwing to tight ends and running backs, it seems like. That's, DK Metcalf needs to have a much better game for them to actually be competitive against good teams. And the Seahawks showed it. Again, they traveled to the East Coast for this game, and they still looked like the much better team in this game. So, again, kudos to the Seahawks. You had a great game. Steelers, you have some work to figure out, especially in this passing offense. Also, can you keep Aaron Rodgers off the ground is the other thing. He's getting crushed out there, and I'm starting to feel bad for him because he's just so old. So please figure that out, Pittsburgh. Still got a couple games to go through today. Last game of the 1 o'clock slate. We're going to be talking about the Ravens and the Browns. First things I want to point out in this game is Derrick Henry was a non-factor in this game for the Ravens. So just keep that in mind when we talk about this, was the fact that Derrick Henry was a non-factor in this game. The Ravens won this game 41-17, and it was either on the defensive side or it was through the air. Lamar Jackson had 4 touchdowns in this game on 225 passing yards. They had a defensive touchdown from Roquan Smith, and they also had an interception return that almost went for a touchdown from Nate Wiggins. But the Browns, they were talking. Let's mention that first. The Browns were talking going into this game. There was a couple quotes that were probably in the Ravens locker room going into this game. It was Jerry Jeudy saying the Ravens secondary don't pose a problem, no problem against their passing offense. He also said, or not Jerry Jeudy, but the other quote was Grant Delpit saying it is not hard at all to take down Derrick Henry. Now, again, I will say, in Grant's defense, Derrick Henry didn't do much in this game. In fact, he had a fumble on 11 carries for 23 yards. It's probably one of the worst games Derrick Henry has had in the past 5 years, I would bet. Right? So Grant Delpit, I'll actually give you the nod that you were right in that sense. But Jerry Jeudy, you had 4 catches for 51 yards, and you didn't have a touchdown. I wouldn't say that says the secondary gave you no problems. Joe Flacco, he threw for 199 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. The touchdown he had should have been an interception. Marlon Humphrey had that ball in his hands, and he tipped it to Cedric Tillman for a touchdown, which is becoming just this scary pattern for the Ravens also. That happened last week against the Bills. It was a Bills player that tipped it last time, but it went for a touchdown to Keon Coleman. Cedric Tillman caught a ball in the corner of the end zone off of a tip pass from Marlon Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey, you just catch the ball. Can you just catch it? Like, what are we doing here? The other interesting aspect that I want to talk about in this game is just the fact that Quinshon Judkins played. Quinshon Judkins had 1 practice for the Browns in the past, month and a half. And he played in this game, and he played a lot. Quinshon Judkins had 10 carries for 61 yards. Right? He was the best rusher in this game. Because, again, the Browns completely shut down the Ravens' run attack. And I'm talking total. Right? Lamar Jackson wasn't running the ball either. Derrick Henry wasn't. Justice Hill wasn't. No one was. They're like, hey, you're going to have to beat us through the air. And Lamar Jackson goes, I guess you don't know I am an MVP caliber quarterback. And he just slang the ball down the field. It was pretty even throughout. Zay Flowers was the top receiver. He had 75 yards. DeAndre Hopkins had 64 yards and a touchdown. Should have had 2 touchdowns. I still disagree with them calling that one back. But Devontae Walker, shout out to Devontae Walker. He had 2 catches for 26 yards. He also had 2 touchdowns. All that guy does, reception-wise, is touchdowns. Tylan Wallace also got a touchdown catch in this game. So again, the Ravens won this game in the air. I also like the fact that they just didn't give up. The Ravens, they scored 21 points in the fourth quarter of this game, right? Against the Bills, they completely shut down their offense because they thought the game was over, and they decided, hey, we're not going to do that this week, and they just kept on going. And so, kudos to the Ravens for this win. Kudos for not quitting. That's a crucial part of this. Again, I will say this: the Browns defense did a great job of stopping the run. I thought they were going to have a lot more success in stopping the passing game. I think they have great cornerbacks, but Lamar Jackson and the receivers proved to be too much for this Browns defense. Myles Garrett said it himself. He said that we did a great job, but once the dam broke, they did anything they wanted, and that seemed to be the case. So congratulations to the Ravens. Flacco, it was nice seeing you in Baltimore again. Unfortunately for yourself, it was a loss, but hey, it was nice seeing you in Baltimore again. Let's talk about another just game. No one had this game. If you had this game prediction, please type in chat like I called it. If you called this, please type in chat I called this, because I just did not expect this. I'm talking about the Broncos and the Colts. So the Broncos traveled to Indianapolis, and the Colts ended up winning this game 29-28. In which was just one of the craziest endings to a game, first off. I hate to see it if you're a Broncos player. But at the same time, kudos to the Colts. Daniel Jones. Who called this performance from Daniel Jones? Daniel Jones was going up against the best secondary in the NFL on Sunday. The best secondary in the NFL. And he absolutely diced them up. I was looking at this. I was looking at stats, and one of the interesting stats I saw, and it's one of those things where it's like if you saw these stats after the fact, you'd be like, oh wow, yeah, they probably lost. Like the leading tackler for the Broncos was Patrick Surtain, right? Patrick Surtain had 9 solo tackles, which generally, like, oh wow, like good job, Patrick Surtain. Generally, if you're a cornerback and you're getting that many tackles, it's because they're picking on you. They were picking on Patrick Surtain. That is absolutely crazy work. On top of this, the receiving core for the Colts was just so balanced. They had 5 receivers get over 50 yards receiving. Tyler Warren, their tight end, their first-round tight end, he had 79 yards, right? And then it was 68 for Alec Pierce. It was 51 for Josh Downs. Jonathan Taylor, who had an insane game, I think he had over 200 all-purpose yards. He had 165 yards rushing. He had another 50 yards receiving. That was an insane game for Jonathan Taylor. The guy, people don't talk about him enough. He had like that one year where he was like basically Offensive Player of the Year. It ended up probably going to someone else, sadly. But people aren't talking about how Jonathan Taylor is still a great running back in this league, because that guy is just he is like their offense in so many ways. But again, I'm still not going to take this away from Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, 23 of 34 for 316 yards and 1 touchdown. Right, so he only had 1 touchdown, but he was moving the ball down the field against this Broncos defense. Who expected that? It was it was decisive, it was accurate, it was consistent. Like, I loved watching that game. And on the other side, you still have to give your credit to, Bo Nix had a good game himself. He had 206 yards, 3 touchdowns, he did have 1 interception, right? But Bo Nix still had a solid game himself. Really, what ended up being the differentiator in this game was a penalty. Right, so the Colts, the Broncos, they went down the field. They brought in their kicker, and he missed like a 42-yarder, right, which put the Colts in pretty solid field position. Daniel Jones got them within, I would say, a 50-yard field goal, and they tried on their kicker. The kicker actually missed it at first. And it wasn't But a flag saved the Colts in this game by essentially an alignment issue. So someone had lined up over the center, over the snapper, and touched the snapper, which gave them enough of a penalty give them a penalty. The Colts got to re-kick it, and they ended up winning by 1. Right? The Broncos were up by 2, and the one thing you couldn't do was get them in field goal range, and that Broncos defense let them get into field goal range. J.K. Dobbins, let me hold on. Before I get to J.K. Dobbins, let me just finish saying this. If you're a defense, you're supposed to be the top defense in the NFL, and you're going up against a quarterback that no one ever counted on or expected to perform like he did. That has to be a huge hit of confidence. That has to be a huge hit to your confidence. If you're Patrick Surtain, you're saying to yourself, what happened? What is wrong with me? Because, again, it wasn't like it was just one receiver that diced him up. It was all over the place. It didn't matter who he was throwing to. They were open, and they were taking advantage. Now, again, I'll talk a little bit about J.K. Dobbins. I'm happy for J.K. Dobbins. He seems to be the top running back for the Broncos. He had 76 yards and a touchdown on the run in this game. And so they seem to have figured out who their top running back is. A lot of people were talking about R.J. Harvey and Tyler Beatty. But, again, to me, the clear front runner in this situation does seem to be J.K. Dobbins. Now, on the receiving side, there's definitely a little bit more of an inconsistency as to who is the guy. Troy Franklin turned out to be the guy this week for them. Again, wasn't enough, but you definitely need to see more out of Courtland Sutton, right, in this game. I think Courtland Sutton had a really down game in this game. He had 4 targets. He only caught 1 catch for 6 yards in this game. That's not going to be enough. And so I'm not putting this all on the Broncos defense. Definitely didn't expect them to have it. The Broncos offense does need to step it up a little bit. Again, Bo Nix, he didn't have a terrible game. 206 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. That's a really good game. Especially for a second-year quarterback, I would call that actually a really good game. One other game before we get into the Sunday night game that we'll talk about is the Cardinals and the Panthers. Now, this was a game where what I'll say is, Panthers fans, I'll tell you this right now. I don't think Bryce Young's the guy. I'm just going to say this now. I do not think Bryce Young is the guy. Too many times he starts out these games with mistakes, and he starts out slow, right? He had a sack fumble, which you can't always put the sack fumble on him, right? That's not his fault necessarily. You need to hold on to the ball still. But then he followed that up with an interception again. And so the Cardinals went up 10-0 really quick in this game. And, at a certain point in this game, it was 27-3, right? 27-3, I think in the third quarter. And everyone, including myself, was this game's over. Cardinals defense considered this game over. Only person that thought this game wasn't over was Bryce Young. Bryce Young, he did carve up, if you will, a prevent defense, right? The Cardinals were essentially out there because they had to be. What's the quote? I'm just here so I'm not fined, right? Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch at press conferences was what the Cardinals defense was out there in that late third quarter, fourth quarter of the Cardinals-Panthers game. They're just I'm just out here so I'm not getting fined. Because it wasn't really a defense out there. And credit to Bryce Young, he didn't quit, and he actually got the Panthers back into this game. He made the game 27-22, right? He got 3 touchdowns to put the Panthers back into this. And once the Cardinals kind of woke up, Bryce Young got stopped again. Bryce Young couldn't either get complete passes or he just couldn't stay on his feet. He ended up getting sacked to end this game. The one thing I will say that's not fair to Bryce Young is Xavier Legette. Xavier Legette, is an absolute liability out there for this Panthers offense. He doesn't look like he knows what he's doing, first off. He doesn't look like he cares. He just looks like he's like, I'm good at football, so I'm out here, and I'm making money, so that's cool. But that's about it. He looks terrible out there. Like, there are so many reasons why they should not have Xavier Legette out there, and unfortunately, there's too many reasons why he has to be. Right? They let Adam Thielen go back to the Vikings. Jalen Coker, he's injured. Right? So you got Ted McMillan and you got Xavier Legette as your guys. Right? That's pretty much what you can count on if you're a Panthers fan right now. Those are your receivers. And so, again, I don't really have much hope for this Panthers team. I will say the Cardinals are a better team than I thought. But, again, I don't have much hope for this Panthers team. In an NFC South, which to me is not a very competitive division, I'm not sure how many wins they'll get. I don't think that they need to bench Bryce Young by any means, but I think it's very obvious to me that Bryce Young is not the guy. Their defense is also terrible. Their defense is not good. They have a couple good players, but this team needs some serious work. If I'm the Panthers GM, I'm trading away a lot of my talent for picks. Whatever talent you have, like I'm trying to get picks. You're trying to get opportunities to find people out there. Yep, yes, I did cover a game that everyone cared about. I did already talk about the 49ers and the Saints. So I'm sorry that you missed that. Right now I'm talking about the Cardinals and the Panthers, and I was about to stop doing that because no one cares about that either. But anyway, again, the last thing I'll say on the Panthers is Bryce Young is not the guy. Sadly, I don't think there is a guy in this draft either. We can talk more about that in a different video. There's not a single quarterback I would draft in the first round besides Sellers, really. The other quarterbacks to me are just, they're not it. So I don't know what the answer is for the Panthers. It doesn't seem to me like they're going to get an answer anytime soon unless some situation happens with a quarterback that's already out there that is unhappy. Right? That's the only thing I really see going. Now, let's talk about this Sunday Night Football game. And first off, I'll just say this real fast. I was not impressed by either one of these teams. Right? I think that's a pretty simple response, but to me, what I felt like I was watching was a JV football game where they both had pretty solid defenses, but like no offense. Like if you were to take Michael Penix and J.J. McCarthy out of that game, I feel like it would have been the same score as it was with them on that field. That was it showed me like, oh, these are young quarterbacks. These are second-year quarterbacks in the NFL, both having very limited experience in NFL games. Like that is really what this game showed me. Do I not like special teams? Of course I like special teams. What does that have to do with this? What are you talking about over there? But anyway, like to me, J.J. McCarthy, he just made too many mistakes. He had 2 interceptions. He had a huge fumble as well. He had a drop snap on a 4th down conversion, which they didn't end up getting. You know, really the only offense I felt like I was watching was Bijan Robinson. Like I felt like it was like, hey, here's like a showcase for Bijan Robinson. That's what I'm watching right now because, again, I was not pleased or impressed with either of these offenses. J.J. McCarthy threw for 158 yards. Michael Penix threw for 135. Right? Bijan Robinson, 143 yards rushing. Bijan Robinson, 25 yards receiving. Drake London had 49 yards receiving. Right? So, like, that was really the highlights of this offense. Justin Jefferson for the Vikings, 81 yards. Right? But both these running backs for the Vikings, one had 30 yards, the other had 23, and then J.J. McCarthy had 25 yards. Like, it just wasn't a good game. It was exactly what you would expect out of 2 second-year quarterbacks that have very limited starts. They have less than 10 starts between the two of them, right? And so for me, I don't know why they necessarily thought this was a good idea to put as like a Sunday game. It honestly kind of bored me. Like this game really actually was boring, in my opinion. The one thing I will say is Bijan Robinson's a dude. Like Bijan Robinson's a good running back. There's no denying that part of this. But other than that, this game was a snooze fest. So I don't know. Any thoughts on the Sunday night football game? Other than that, did I miss something that someone else saw and was like, hey, you don't realize that this was like really cool or exciting? Because to me, again, I just felt like I was watching a JV football team with a really good running back. That's what I felt like I was watching last night. I'll go with varsity. Sorry, the defenses were good, so I'll go with varsity football. But again, to me, that's really all that I thought was exciting. Last thing I'll quickly cover is we got 2 games tonight. We got first game is actually the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are traveling to Houston. Right. That I think this will be. I think going into this game real fast, something that I would potentially talk about is the fact that I think this is a great matchup for Baker Mayfield. I think Baker Mayfield is going to have a great game against the Houston Texans. That's really going to be the biggest thing I'm looking for is how many yards and how many touchdowns does Emeka Egbuka get against this Houston Texans defense? And on the other side of that is can the Texans actually keep C.J. Stroud on his feet? That's going to be a huge thing. You know, I'm not even saying the Texans have like some stout pass rush, right? That's not even what the Buccaneers are known for. But this Texans offensive line, they just keep playing this game of like, I feel like it's like musical chairs, and I still don't think they found the right formula. Maybe that'll change this week, but last week I was not impressed with C.J. Stroud. You know, I thought Chubb did a pretty good job as their lead running back, but again, I was not impressed with C.J. Stroud whatsoever. To me, he didn't look anything like he did in his rookie season especially. But, you know, he had like 188 yards passing and an interception. And, again, Nick Chubb, he had like 60 yards rushing in this game. But I need to see more out of the receivers, and I need to see more out of the offensive line, especially for the Texans. And then, again, on the Buccaneers side of things, you know, for me, I want to see how well Emeka Egbuka does against this defense. I think Emeka Egbuka might have like a crazy game in this game. I think he's going to break out because, you know, Baker Mayfield, he didn't have a lot of yards last week. You know, he had like 167 yards passing, but he did have 3 touchdowns. And I think Emeka Egbuka is just getting started. He had 2 touchdowns last week. I bet you he repeats that. I bet you Egbuka gets another 2 touchdowns and then over 100 yards in this game. That's what I'll say. I think he is going to be such a good receiver in the NFL, and we're just seeing the beginning of it for him. Now, the other game I think is going to be a little bit more exciting. I'm talking about the Los Angeles Chargers traveling to Las Vegas to play the Raiders. For me especially, I think that the Raiders are a team that no one is counting on. I think the Raiders are a team that people are counting out pretty regularly. And the Raiders getting the performance they got last week out of Geno Smith was just spectacular. Geno Smith had 362 yards passing last week, and that's also with Ashton Genty, their prized possession. The running back they got very early on in the draft this year had 38 yards on 19 carries. That's terrible. I've been holding my breath on Ashton Genty. I think he's going to be a good running back. I don't think he's going to be that good of a running back, though. When you look at Ashton Genty, just ask yourself this: what does he do? What does he do like really well? Like, what does Ashton Genty do better than anyone else? Because to me, it's nothing. He's really good at a bunch of things, but he doesn't do anything particularly well. He's a short, stockier running back that doesn't have this breakout speed. He can break tackles, but again, he's not a speedster. He's not super quick. But he's like just good at everything, right? That's what he was at Boise. Is like he could do all those things at a very high level, but not the highest level. And that's what really differentiates and makes good receivers, good running backs, good quarterbacks. It's like you have to do something very, very well. And with Ashton Jeanty, I just don't see that thing. I don't see that X factor as part of him. And so when I go into this game, I'm looking at this. If I'm the Chargers, I'm just focusing on the pass game. I'm saying go ahead and try to let Ashton Jeanty run on us. We already have a pretty solid defensive line and linebacking core. So like just try to run on us. But like I'm actually focusing on the pass if I'm the Chargers. I'm saying we are not going to let Geno Smith throw over 300 yards on us. Let's see what this rookie running back can do. And on the other side of things, you're the Chargers. You're coming off a game where you just beat the Chiefs in Brazil week 1. You hadn't beat the Chiefs in so long, and you have all this momentum, all this confidence. Like, can you repeat it? Like, can you get on the road again and go out and beat a Raiders team who also is confident? Because Justin Herbert had a great performance out there. In crucial situations, he was making the right decision. He hasn't been able to do that a lot in his career. And so I want to see that again. Is if this game is close, does Justin Herbert make the right decisions in order to put the Chargers in winning situations? That will be the deciding factor to me in this game because they already have the talent. I'm a huge fan of their running back as well as their receiving core. I've talked about this. First off, Amari Hampton, I'm a huge fan of his, but I've said this. Besides the Bengals, I think that besides the Bengals, I think the Chargers have the best receiving core in the NFL. I think Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey, and Quentin Johnston are a great trio that is, again, second to just the Bengals in this NFL. And so I'm looking to see how they respond because the Chargers have been really good at, they've been really good when it comes to certain performances, but then when they really need to, they don't necessarily perform. And so they performed against the Chiefs, right? That was the game. But now it's like, hey, when you don't have all the eyes of the world watching you, are you able to have that same performance? I'm curious to see what happens there. I think in this game, I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. I'm going to go with 24-21 Chargers in this game. I think that's going to be the score of this Chargers game. And I didn't give a prediction, sorry, for the Bucs and the Houston game. This game is in Houston. I'm not sold on Houston though. I'm actually going to take the Buccaneers to win this game, and I think they win this game 27-17. I think this will be a 10-point game. I think the Buccaneers are going to go into Houston and handle business 27-17. But that's everything I wanted to cover. Again, please make sure you subscribe to this channel. Really do appreciate it. Also, make sure to like, comment on this video. Tell me other stories that I should be covering. If there's other content you want me to get into. I really do appreciate everyone's time today. That's it for me today. Thank you again for watching another episode of Bad Takes in Football. This is your host, Bad Takes, signing out.